Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptee podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Meaghan. Thank you very much for making the time to come on the show today, Meaghan. I really, really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
Yeah,
It's great to be here.
it's great to be here. So, it's great for all of us. It's just a loving, isn't it? Everybody's happy. It's cool. We're having a great time. So Meaghan, could you introduce yourself to the audience, please, to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Meaghan, and I am from Port Alberni in Canada. So, just on Vancouver Island here. Um, I'm an artist and a writer, and I work as a counselor as well. And I'm a discovery adoptee. So, for any of you that don't know what that means, it means that one or both of my parents, in my case, just one, um, wasn't my birth parent, and I didn't get to find that information out until I was an adult. So, for me, that was when I was 33. So, well into my adult life. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
is the counselling work, is that within the adoption space
A
or
little bit,
a little
a
bit?
little bit. I'd like to get more into that. Currently, I'm working with kids who are on the autism spectrum mostly, or who've got anxiety, depression, that kind of thing, and we do art together and
Yeah,
nature walks and that kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Because when I hear Vancouver Island, I think, is that whale watching territory? Is that where people go to
It
watch?
so is, yes, and lots of whales this time of year. Lots of people are seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
I guess that's connecting to the meditative space, is it?
Yeah,
That
absolutely. Yeah,
nature.
when we're in nature and we're using all our senses, right? So when we go into nature, we're looking and listening and smelling and touching the different things and really just sort of getting back into our bodies, hey, and into our natural state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the kids with autism are into that, yeah, I'm guessing.
I mean, everybody's different, right? So some are, some aren't.
Yeah,
Yeah, some are more into stories or more into play or building, or we just kind of, I just go where they take me,
yeah,
really. Yeah.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
the that's your creative nature coming through, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I guess in terms of, the timeline for me is, so I started getting into pottery when I was about 30. And it was just kind of this neat thing. There was a lady in town who had a studio, and well, it's a long story, but anyways, we ended up working in her studio, and she sort of apprenticed me a little bit and my daughter. And at the time, my daughter, she had dyslexia and a number of learning difficulties. And the little community that we're in, we were having difficulty finding resources. So at this time, she was, how old would she have been? About 9 or 10. And she still didn't know how to read. Like, she was very, very delayed in all these kinds of skills. And taking her to pottery, I saw changes happening for her. I saw her self-esteem shift. I saw her starting to print in the clay. So she'd make things and want to put someone's name on it, or write this story about it into what she was making. Um, and so I just saw it being really good for her, you know? And so then when we were, our time was up in the studio, um, I was just kind of hooked. And so my husband said, "Well, we've got this space. Let's set it up and get going." And so when I found out that my dad, who had raised me, was not my birth dad, um, it was really kind of a godsend that I had this space to work in. So I just kind of lived in there and just sculpted and worked and had my brain do its thing while my hands were doing their thing, um and it was just really healing. So then when I did counseling training, it just seemed like a really natural sort of connection to lead into. working that creative energy into the healing space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you come across a guy called Rupert Spira?
I haven't. No. Who is he?
He's a potter who is now a teacher. I mean, he doesn't like, actually, I use the word teacher. He doesn't like being referred to as that. He shares a philosophy with people, and it's called non-duality. But interestingly, he started in he like you. He had he went into pottery. He apprenticed with somebody, and pottery was his life. And then he got into speaking about this. He learned stuff for himself, for his own well-being, and then started sharing that with others, and then eventually left the pottery behind and shares this stuff. Interesting. But and his work has a precision to it, whether it's his pottery or his speaking. His really, yeah, he has a BBC English voice. Very, very precise. His language, his intellect is great, and he shares some interesting stuff. So that's a bit of an aside. So I was going to ask you if your own learning led you into the counselling. Did your own learning on the back of the discovery, being a late discovery adoptee, did that lead into the counselling as well?
It did. It was kind of, life is really sort of funny. So the way it went was, we had the 2 kids already, my husband and I, and we were actually talking about adopting. And so at least in BC where we are, it's a fairly large process, and they make you go through a whole program and parenting, learning how to do for special needs and all this kind of thing. And then the social worker that we were talking with, I remember her saying that she had been a counselor to start with. And I sort of said, oh, I've always thought about doing that. And she said, well, you should just do it. Like, it's not as hard as it sounds, and just do it. So it was sort of this like inkling of a thing back here. And then when we were nearing the end of the adoption process is when my parents sort of took me out, and we went for this walk, and they disclosed this information about my dad. And then of course we had to tell our social worker, and that kind of threw everything. The social worker said, oh, this is huge. And I said, is it? Because I was still very in shock. And she said, yeah, no, this is big. You're going to need like 6 months at least. She said, so I'm going to go away, and give you guys 6 months to just sort of let this settle. And then we'll see where you're at again. And she was really wise to do that, because sort of in that 6 months, it was pretty bumpy. And I think it was maybe 6 months after that I thought, no, I'm going to go into the training and get working with people. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Just sort of shift everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you process this stuff, is that how you talk about it? Processed it? I don't.
Yeah, that's how I talk about it, is processing. Yeah.
As you processed this shocking news at, what was it, 33?
Yeah, that's right.
You kind of, from looking at your website and talking before we started recording, you kind of you've made sense of your own journey, whilst recognizing that every late discovery adoptee's journey is going to be different. I guess since everybody's different journey is different. What did that 12 months, 6 to 12 months look like for you?
Oh,
was that?
wow.
Well, how did it? Oh,
It
and
was
more
it was
importantly, how
rough,
did it feel?
Simon.
How
Yeah,
did it
it was
feel?
rough. It was really rough. My mom, so again, yeah, everybody's, the way it plays out for everyone is different. For me, the way it played out was that they sort of gave me the news, but they didn't give me any details. So it was like probably 6 months till I had like a name. And in that 6 months, I just felt like I was floating. Like I was just, there was no ground, there was no anchor. I cried a lot. I was, I felt rage and anger like I've never felt. Um, in some ways I was relieved because it made it so that a lot of things made sense now, because there was a lot of things that didn't make sense before that now made sense. So I was sort of mentally reviewing my childhood and going, oh, that's why my sister and I don't look alike. And oh, that's why I sometimes feel like I don't fit, you know? Um, things like there was one instance that came up in this, it brought up a lot of emotion for me. So um, after the birth of my second son, I had a lot of autoimmune type issues, inflammation in my body and that. And the doctors had thought that I had lupus. And so they were, doing their investigating as they do. And to my knowledge, my granddad had died from lupus. And so I took this news to mom and dad and I said, they think I've got lupus. And they said with the family connection of granddad and so on, that, that's really likely what it is. And I was very scared. My little one was like under a year old. Um, and there was no reaction from my mom and dad. Just really not much reaction at all. And I kind of said, like, do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying? And my mom just said, you know what? We never agreed your granddad had lupus. It can't be that. Let's have dinner. So it's that kind of thing that I sort of reflected on. And I was like, you weren't worried because you knew I didn't share his blood. But rather than tell me, you just kind of said, well, we never believed he had that anyways. And so it's like, and I hear this from other late discoveries, is that it's not just the one lie. It's that once you discover, you then start to see all the little lies that had to be kept up to keep the big lie. And so the sense of betrayal is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what can I say? I mean,
Yeah.
I can only say I can only bring my own little bit into this, right?
Yeah.
This fact that I talked about before we started recording, the fact that I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm an early discovery adoptee.
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I've come up with a new
Mm-hmm.
identity for myself. But I wasn't told. I wasn't told till I was 40 that the teddy bear that I'd had
Yes.
growing up was from my birth mother.
Yeah.
And my first, here's the thing, right? My first reaction to that was, that's interesting, of gentle curiosity. The
Yeah.
anger came later,
Yeah.
came a couple of months later. So it's kind of the, I guess, a bit of shock. Have you seen? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen
Yeah.
that Kubler-Ross curve. Have you heard? Have you seen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's one of those. It's a curve, but she doesn't say how long it takes to go through each bit.
No.
Some people jump from it, so it's kind of like, how useful is it? I don't know. But yeah, that little anger. So I'm talking about my teddy bear.
Yeah.
So in terms of the significance of
Oh, yeah.
who's my dad,
Yeah.
or sorry, you know,
Yeah.
I, I'm pointing fun at my own little
Oh,
story of the thing, but you know, it's those little things. I can see how those little things, but it's a house of cards, isn't it? It's
It
the
is.
secrecy, and it's well, it's whatever reason. I mean, has your mum ever given you a reason for the secrecy?
Oh yeah. No, the story, I yeah, the story that came out is enormous. And I don't think I talk about it explicitly on the website, and I can here to some degree. So the story that came out, here's my preface.
Oh,
My
you only
preface.
need to share what you want, Meaghan. I'm not going
Well, no,
to
no. I
dive.
always want to be careful because I wasn't there, right? I wasn't there when it happened. So the story that I've heard one version from my mom, and I've heard one version from my brother. And depending who you talk to is what the story is, right? So in my mom's version of the story, she was kidnapped actually by my birth dad. So she came into relationship with him, not fully wanting to, when she was 15, and stayed in that relationship until she was 21 or 22, I believe. And my half brother's version of that is that she was an affair, because my birth dad was married already and he had 3 boys. And my brother was aware of it. He was actually there for most of their relationship. So yeah, so my birth dad had 2 families. um, and previous to that, he had had a son and a daughter that were both placed for adoption as well. um, and
Wow.
so it was quite a mess, and it was a lot to sort through. The kind of person that he was, and to try to, in those early kind of days, decide, is this somebody I want to find? He was 35 and she was 15 when this thing started. And you know it's not a pretty sort of a story. So her reason for keeping it was safety. She felt that he was unsafe and it wasn't going to be a good place for me to be person for me to be in contact with.
Yeah.
And she was right, I would say, right to keep me from him. And I don't know that I don't agree with the deception and all of that, because it's caused a lot of pain and a lot of that for me. But I understand where she
Yeah.
came from. So yeah, there was a lot of, so yeah, basically over that year I would get tidbits of information from her, just a bit at a time, a bit at a time. And then with each bit of information, I would have emotion to that and I would grieve it. And I think what I had to learn from it was, obviously, in the stories that I was being told by her, there was a lot of trauma, right? And so now I can look back at that and I can go, okay, so I felt fearful, but it was her fear. And I felt trauma, but it was her trauma as much as my own, right? So in the way those stories were handed down, right? Kidnapping, that makes us really fearful, right? That feels really scary and awful. Um, and so I had a lot of fear about finding him, my birth dad, and I had a lot of fear about finding my half siblings.
Mhm.
Um, because what if I accidentally found him, you know, and or maybe it was okay to find him, right? So it was a lot of teasing that out, and I did reach out to him a couple of times, um, and then was very scared. To be honest, I made like a separate email to do that, and then thought, oh, please don't actually respond, because that's quite frightening. Um, but I found my half sister, that was his first child that was placed for adoption. So we connected, and she's older than my mom, to give sort of like,
Yeah, of course.
that was
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of interesting, right? So she's older than my mom even. But she's really nice, and we're in touch, to this day. And it was kind of neat to see her, um, just certain things that we have in common, different mannerisms, and and things like that. And yeah, am I talking too much?
No,
Should I
not
keep
at all.
going?
No, this is
No?
fascinating.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah.
yeah, it was her trauma, and I do you know she's another Canadian lady. I interviewed her for the podcast, but I'm just waiting for some pictures and
Mm,
stuff to put it. A lady called Marnie Tetz. Have you come across her?
I haven't come across her. No.
She was adopted, and she eventually, uh, yeah, she contacted her birth mother. She found her birth mother, and this lady couldn't, although it was pretty how do you say that word? Incontrovertible evidence. It was clear.
Right.
It was a kind of no-brainer. But it took the lady 2 years to admit it.
Right. Yeah.
So the trauma of being forced to give money away was so deep. She had been told, this baby cannot be yours. You cannot keep it. So
Wow.
she had said, right, well, this is not my baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so wired into her
Yeah.
that she couldn't admit it. And that's what immediately came to my mind when you shared
That's
your
really
things.
interesting. Yeah. I think almost a little bit of like the opposite happens from what I hear in late discoveries, where the adoptive parents, um, this wasn't true in my case, but I've heard others where it is, where the adoptive parents are presented with DNA evidence or other evidence from their child that says, hey, look at this thing I've discovered and let's talk about it. And the parents are insistent that it's not true.
Well, both things are denial.
Yeah, both. And
It's
yeah, it's the same. Yeah. And they say, no, you're
it's both.
ours. And that's, even when there's, evidence there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember a strange thing happened to me once in a cafe when I was on holiday with my dad, and we were playing. I was playing pool with some kids on. It was on holiday, and I heard a dad, a dad, say to my dad, my adopted dad, clearly,
Mm-hmm.
"That's your son, isn't it? That's your son playing pool," pointing at me, and I overheard this guy saying this, and me and my dad. My dad looked at me, I looked at him, we exchanged a glance, a bit of a smile, and
Mm-hmm.
left and kind of left it at that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, and it is that sort of, is it awkward? Is that the word I'm looking for? Like it's sort of reminds me that, I mean, that one of the other experiences that I had was when my a dad passed away. He passed away about 2 years ago. Um, most of the people believed he was my birth dad, right? So at the funeral, people would make comments about my children looking like him and
yeah,
various things. And it was really odd because I was grieving him. But at the same time, some of the comments that being made were sort of steeped in this
yeah,
lie. And it wasn't the time to say anything about the lie or say, no, well, that can't be. My son can't look like my dad because that's not,
yeah,
or whatever it
yeah.
is. And so, yeah,
It's
you just kind of smile
you
and
just kind of smile and yeah, and
yeah,
that's it.
like, okay,
But
yeah.
what, what I wanted to ask you is what's there's the kind of discovering the truth. So
Mm-hmm.
there's the logical journey, and,
Yeah.
uh, and the tidbits of information that you've been fed, and clearly, they've been what's the word? There's been discrepancies, very clear discrepancies, probably discrepancies it's two different versions, isn't it? Completely.
It's
two,
just two different
two
versions.
versions.
Yeah,
Discrepancies
that's right.
doesn't do it justice,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you've had these two different versions. One from your half brother, one from your mum. So there's the truth, and then there's the emotional stuff as well. And how do you see those two things? How do they are they the same? Are they going down the same track? Are they kind of like X and Y axis? That might be a bit left brainy for a creative lady. Do you know what I mean? But how do you see those?
So I actually see it as both being true. I see it as both being true. So my brother's experience of that was, my dad's with this new lady and she's kind of like my stepmom, and this is what's happening, and I've got to keep it a secret from my family. And the way my mom experienced that was that she had no power, and that's where she had to be. So to me, both things are true, and both are, really sad, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terribly sad.
Terribly sad.
How do you see I didn't ask the question quite right. How do you see the truth journey and the emotional journey?
I see. I think for me, with every bit of truth is the emotional journey. So you referenced sort of Kubler-Ross before, right? So exactly that. So with each discovery, right, with each piece of truth, there is a bit of, sometimes shock or denial, and there's anger, and there's sadness, and there's, I think the piece that is missing, and I've referenced it on my website, is confrontation. So with each of those pieces too, you kind of like, sometimes there's someone to talk to about the information, right? Or, there's some fact checking you have to do, or there's some digging or whatever it is. And, or maybe even just sharing with your own, immediate family. And so that's hard. It's hard.
Where I'm coming from on that is that I think a lot of people, a lot of adoptees, I see them searching for birth parents. And like it's a journey, and that's going to be I'll be happy when I know the truth. Right. So there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
And I know that I've done, my healing has been in stages.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest part of the healing took place before I went on the search. So we live in a world where we're brought up to believe I'll be happy when. Right. So I'll be happy when. So at the moment, just to make this a little bit lighter, okay, I'll be happy when I lose my COVID weight and my little muffin tops above my jeans, right? Okay. And then I'll be happy when the weather's a bit nicer. I'll be happy when I can get to Greece on holiday, which I love. I love. We've been on holiday to Greece for not last year, but the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, and had a great time. So I'll be happy when, and then in the societal conditioning, I'll be happy when I get my mortgage paid off, or I buy my house instead of renting, or when I retire, or when I get my promotion. We're brought up on this
Postponing
idea.
happiness.
I'll be happy when. Sorry?
Yes. Postponing happiness.
Yes. And as one of the mentors that really helped me with my stuff, which was my happiness, actually, not adoption stuff, not any specific adoption. They talk about us being waiters. There's waiters, creators, and every great feeling that we want is right inside. It is inside us right now. You know, our chest is a treasure chest, and we're waiting for an excuse to bring that out. So I think, well, as somebody that did that for 40 years of my life, right, I see a lot of adoptees thinking, I'll be happy when I find my birth mother.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't always work out, does it? And so it might work out, it might not work out. But there's one true thing here is that as I see it, my take on it is that happiness is inside us right now. And what Rupert Spira would say was, we are that happiness, which is a little bit woo-woo and a little bit of a flip comment, or woo-woo or a flip comment for a slightly strange chap to just spout at the top. But and I believe him, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm laboring this a little bit, but because I wanted to share that with you. I've never really shared that with anybody. Just to debate it as two adoptees that have gone through different bits. What do you see anything in that? Do you see anything in that?
And I'll be happy when. So I think what came up for me as you were talking about that was sort of landmarks, right? So you referenced, like losing weight or paying off a mortgage or different benchmarks, right? So when I got a name, that was pretty satisfying. When I got I was blessed enough to get an apology from my dad before he died. And not everybody gets that. And it was really heartfelt and meaningful. And it wasn't an apology that was followed with, I did this, but, or I'm sorry, but. It was just a real, true, moment of connection and recognition. That was really wonderful. And I think through this, I have had to sort of, as you say, find happiness now. Right? Because when we do focus on what's happening right now, usually right now is great. Right?
Yeah.
Back to the nature, back to the hands in the clay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of spiritual practice, that's been pretty huge for me. So like I pray a lot. I practice mindfulness, so really just taking time to breathe and come back to the present moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. When our search ends, there's a mini relief.
Yeah.
So something's been playing on our mind. I'm talking about myself here. Something's been playing on my mind. So I actually, this is directly about what we're doing here, right? So I was before I came into the doing podcasts and into the adoption space, I was doing other stuff, and I was doing stuff with kids, actually, like you. Very interesting.
Cool.
But it was in a completely different way to you. So it was group workshops in primary schools or elementary schools. We call them in the States. You guys call them primary schools, I guess, in Canada. Do you? Or do you call them elementary?
Sometimes more it's elementary,
okay.
but primary works too.
In the States, they don't know what primary means. It's all elementary. But so I was doing work in that, and having and having a great time in empowering the kids to be happy, and stopping them, stopping bullies upsetting them, empowering them. So that, yeah, and the stuff I did worked with the kids, but I couldn't get it to work because the schools didn't really want it.
Yeah, it's tough.
So this was an absolute nightmare for me, right? Because I've got this stuff. I'm thinking, these kids tell me this superb stuff, but the schools don't want it, and I took that really personally. And that, so the thing that was on my mind for 7 years was, how am I going to scale this? And now I'm in the adoption space, and everybody's so much more open. Everybody's so much more curious to learn. That thought has gone now.
Yes.
How do I make it? How do I scale it? Well, I'm scaling it with a podcast, which people all over the world can listen to. That's how I'm scaling it. So I've got that relief. That's the answer. It is. People say, well, if happiness is right inside us right now, well, I have things have happened and I've been happy. And yeah, that's because the thought that was cheesing us off,
yes,
has gone.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And it is I'm a simple guy, so it is as simple as that, and that's it.
Well, yeah, I think it's finding what makes you happy, right?
Oh, that's an easy one.
And what's that? What makes you happy?
At one stage, it's at one level, it's a happy thought.
Yeah.
And at a deeper level, it's knowing that I am happiness and that we all are happiness. That is our nature before the SH1T that we go through in life, like being relinquished in my world, or being bullied in my world, or having the world, having the rug pulled from under you, like happened to you at 33. But all those little things that you talked about not fitting, didn't feel like you fitted in, and then you got the big mallet over the head happened, and you got this shocking info. The secret came out of the cat was out the bag.
That's right. It sure was. I think for me, the creativity part of it is where my happiness is. So, and sort of getting re in touch with my intuition, sense of self, because that's the other thing that happens, I think, is because it's almost like do you guys use the term gaslighting there?
Kind
or is that
of,
a Canadian thing? Sort of. Yeah, it's sort of the sense that, somebody's just bold-faced trying to convince you something is true that isn't true. Right? Even if, you've just seen it or you just know it. But in a way, it's sort of like LDAs live a whole life of gaslighting, right? So the whole life, there's this whole false, it's a false life, and you develop a false self and so after discovery, it's kind of like painful, yes, but it's freeing also in a way, because you get to recreate yourself. You get to find yourself. and be in the world as who you are, and like I remember my husband saying to me, because I post discovery, I was like, well, who am I and who am I and where do I fit? And he was like, you are you. You are you. So you just have to figure out who that is and not worry about where you fit and just be you. So, and I think creativity is where I found myself again. So in art and in writing, and I've got to be working on some pretty cool projects. So there's a there's a writer director in Eastern Canada that I've been working with, and he's wanting to make a late discovery movie. So it's not going to be about me, but it is going to be about somebody like me. And so we've gotten to sort of, like share stories and really get into that creative process. And it's been a lot of fun.
So do you know the word of the origin of the word inspired?
No, I'd love to hear that.
So it's in spirit, the spirit that we truly are.
Yeah.
That the chi, or some the guys in the Eastern world would call it chi, or we would call it spirit. So when you are working on a film project, I can see your face light up when you're talking about the pottery and the art. You are in spirit, that you are who you are, who you truly are.
Yeah.
Beyond, I always fluff this, but we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. You heard that one?
Yeah, I have heard that one. Yeah.
So you're spirit, right? And it's the same with the word enthusiastic. So enthusiastic comes from Greek, I think, and theos is like theology is God, right? So enthusiasm comes from entheos, and theos is the God within. So God is another word for spirit. So when we are enthusiastic, we are being ourselves, because we're being God and we're being spirit, and we are lost, aren't we? We're lost. Like my dad was he turned into a sculptor after he got out, sold his business. He became a sculptor and an artist, and he'd been an entrepreneur and sales guy for 30 years. So he was in spirit, he was enthusiastic, he was being who we truly are and lost in the work. So I guess you lose yourself in the work, and you lose your kind of like your egoic self or whatever, the shallower self, and you find your deeper self. Does that sound like?
I think what I'm thinking of as you're saying that is, it's almost like you get to be as God intended you to be, or I get to be as God intended me to be, without all of this extra. Because what is God if he is an energy and creative force, hey?
Yeah.
And just life, right? He's life force. Yeah.
And that's where you escaped to find yourself in that shock period at that time, and that's what you're helping their kiddos to do as well.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I'm so excited to be here doing things like this and sharing my story, because I think like the website that I created, that I did that because there was not very much out there.
Yeah.
Right. We've got all these maps for how to rationalize different events in our life, right? Different things that are hard to deal with. And there wasn't something like that for me.
Yeah.
Or people like me. And I thought, well, let's make something. And it might not be true for everybody, but it's an attempt. It's a start.
It's a start. I mean, I saw I saw a great pictorial representation of lots of different things that all kind of connect together, and it's very as an artistic an artistic person, that it is visual, and in a world where we're talking about a podcast. We've been talking for whatever 45 minutes. We've probably done a couple 100,000 words, but sometimes the visuals communicate this stuff far simpler and far clearer. And just for the listeners, and for your knowledge, obviously we're going to put a link into the website in the show notes, so people can take their own view on whether this helps them. And I would say, it's like that Kubler-Ross curve thing, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross curves. That was I think it was for death. I think it was.
Yeah,
post.
That's right.
But it's post any shock,
Yes.
and I would encourage anybody to, even if you're not a late discovery adoptee listening, have a look at Meaghan's model and see whether there's any clarity, whether that helps you get any clarity. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I haven't?
You know what? I just you brought up something really interesting, which is that we use a lot of words, and then this thing that I've made is visual. And what got me through it was making all of these visual items. And so I think one of the things we didn't talk about is left brain, right brain. So this is really kind of a neat thing, just a little bit of information. So the right brain is where we hold trauma. It's where we hold our emotions. And we think in pictures there. And it can be hard to access what's there, but often there's a lot of wisdom there. So we spend a lot of time in our left brain, where we have logic and reason and rationality and words. So one of the really cool things about using visuals or arts is that it's actually a way to let the right brain speak. It sort of is using the language of the right brain. And so some really cool things can come of that, which is kind of the heart of, my work with kids and, and my own self, is that we build these things. And then when you take a moment to reflect on the thing that you've built and put words to it, sometimes it's surprising what's there.
Yeah.
The
other thing that popped into my head on that was, do you know anybody are you into animation? Could you animate that? Could you animate that?
That would be interesting. You know what? I know some kids that are pretty amazing at animating, and I've watched them do it, and they just blow me away. So the short answer is no, I don't know how to do that. But I know some kids that probably do. Yeah. It's very technical stuff.
Well, it is on one level.
It'd be really cool, though.
It is on one level to do it on the computer. It's very. But have you seen these things on Facebook? These people that obviously they're trying to stand out on Facebook. They stand there and they've got a pad and they.
Right, and they have the words.
And the words and the left. So right. It doesn't necessarily need to be full on. Was it Adobe Aftershock? Is it? I can't remember. Aftershock was one of the, back in the day, was one of the animation programs, and it didn't need to be kind of like that. The metaphor that I use with my work with kids was I'll tell you, I'll go back a bit, right? So I talked about the waiter and creator, waiting for something to happen to let the good feelings out, or being a creator, letting the good stuff out right now. Yeah. So that came from my mentors, Richard and Liz. They're at ministryofinspiration.com. So I'll put a link on that as well. So he talks about the sausage machine. Like, life is like a sausage machine. And most people are waiting. So they are waiting at the end of the sausage machine for happiness, but they are mistakenly, like all of us, they're putting hard work in. They're putting hard work and stress into the sausage machine, and that's what they're getting out of life, So so when I started doing work with kids, I figured, well, I started looking at the sausage machine, and then and sausages weren't appropriate because they have different meanings for young boys. Boys talk about genitalia. I don't know what's the right word to say in a PC world. So I came up with the juicer.
Okay, this
works. Feelings come from thoughts, like juice comes from fruit. And then we played games around that with the primary school kids, the elementary school kids. But it didn't end there, because the kids got to see that they aren't their feelings and they aren't their thoughts. They are the juicer. So they are not affected by their feelings or their thoughts.
So just
like we are.
Empowering them, really, right?
Yeah, empowering them.
That they can handle this, whatever it is, they can
handle whatever it is, and that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
So, we talked about the juices gone from it's running on automatic most of the time. So sometimes you need to switch it to manual and put some positive pomegranates in.
Yeah.
And there's gunk. There's gunk. There's old gunk in the juicer. So like old nasty nectarines and So that I've just started talking about that because it's animation. I never got to animate the juicer, but I created a comic book about it anyway. So, but I think that would be a great. That would be.
That sounds awesome.
You're taking your own models and getting them and having the kids. If the kids want to animate it, so some kids want to draw. So when I talked about the juicer, I used to say, well, what do you want to do? You can draw it out, you can act it out, and exactly the same way as you said. I think different kids get keen on different things. So let them, like at school, they've got to toe the line and fit in with the way, and
it's pretty cool when they show up. So what I have is I have a little home studio, and COVID has changed this. So I'm going to talk about pre-COVID times. They would show up and there is sandboxes inside and toys and clay and bins full of art supplies, and they can just access whatever they want. And we make messes and we play, and man, oh man, is play powerful thing too, right?
Kids learn more when they're having fun. We all learn more when we're having fun,
don't we? And it takes our nervous systems out of all the stress and into a social engagement. It lets us connect with each other. It lets us play out our emotions. It lets us play out different situations. And I look at the adult world and I think, man, we could learn from the kids. We could have some more play too, because it's so good for us. Yeah.
Go and play, ladies and gentlemen.
Play.
And if you don't feel up to playing, go and do it anyway. Go and play with your kids. Go and play with your kids. Yeah, I heard this ages ago from a guy, a businessman saying, he's saying, I've got really good at playing with my son and daughter. I've got really good at doing that. And I thought that's a good place to be.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to link to Meaghan's website in the show notes, guys. Thank you so lot for coming on, Meaghan. It's been a lovely conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been really nice getting to know you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all again. We'll speak to you all again very soon. Thanks a lot. All the best. Bye-bye.